And welcome back, students. We are now going to start talking about basic components as we explore what is a computer. So, getting started, recall in our previous lesson we defined what a computer was, a device that processes data according to a set of instructions. Today we're going to start looking at what hardware is and some of the basic components you may see in a personal computer. So, let's talk about hardware. All right. Before we do that, though, we need to create a definition of what hardware is. Hardware is the mechanical, magnetic, electronic, and electrical devices comprising a computer system. Hardware is the physical components of a computer. Therefore, you can physically touch on, like software. Software, yeah, it's like you can put it on a disk, but you're not necessarily touching the software. Then you're touching the disk. Hardware is the physical components. Your CPU, your memory, your storage. You can actually pick up that component and touch it. You can't touch the data on it, but you can physically touch that object. So let's quickly talk about the main components. When examining a personal computer, there are three basic components: display, the computer tower, and input-output devices, which are also known as peripherals. An input device is something that takes user input and passes it to the data of the computer, such as a mouse or keyboard. An output device is something that takes data from the computer and outputs or prints it, is another way of thinking about it, onto some kind of medium or display, such as a monitor or printer. Let's look at those basic internal components. These are the basic internal components often found inside a computer. You have your motherboard, you have your central processing unit, or CPU, you have memory, which is often, in our case, going to be RAM, or random access memory, a power supply unit, and a storage. Storage, of course, is usually manifest in the form of your hard drive, which is either a traditional hard disk, HDD, or it is a solid-state drive, or SSD. Now we're going to examine these briefly before going into greater detail later on in the course. And later on in the course, that means that we're going to take each of these components and we're going to break it down into different categories. Additionally, there are some components which are optical, but may not be on all devices. So some of these optional components are things like optical drives and internal cards, so like video cards, sound cards, network cards, etc. So let's start with the first one, the motherboard. All right, and that's a picture of the motherboard right up here in the corner. This is a basic circuit board here, but it's not just any basic circuit board. This is the main printed circuit board. Many crucial electronic components, such as your CPU and RAM, are housed here. The motherboard also contains slots which allows for expansions such as video cards, sound cards, network cards, etc. It also contains the basic instructions for the computer known as BIOS, or the basic input-output system. All right, next is the central processing unit, or the CPU, and it's that little chip that you see in the corner there. All right. As I mentioned, it's also known as the CPU. This is truly the brain of a computer. This is where the device, your computer, carries out many of the arithmetic, logical, and input operations of the system. For those of you that took computers in logic, when we talked about logic operations, using AND gates, OR gates, NOR gates, all that other stuff, this is what does that. The CPU is the main processor that handles all the different kind of operations. Now, because there's a lot of activity that goes on with the CPU, there's typically a large fan placed directly over the CPU in order to help keep temperature cool, because it generates a lot of heat for all the electricity constantly passed through those circuits. All right, next up is memory, and we have two example sticks of memory right there. All right, memory, also known as RAM, is called that for the type of memory. There are other types, but we're going to stick with RAM for this lesson. RAM stands for random access memory. This is used to store temporary instructions for the computer. And one of the advantages of RAM, or memory in particular, is that it allows for high-speed transfer of information. Right? It's one of the fastest forms of transmitting that information. However, kind of volatile, because if the power is shut off from the computer, any information in RAM is lost. So those temporary instructions that are in RAM are no longer there. And that's part of the reason why when you say, have you tried turning your computer on and off? Because sometimes some of those problems might exist here in memory, and by restarting your computer, you flush that out. All right, next up is the power supply unit. or the PSU. This is what supplies energy to the computer. It converts the AC electrical power to DC electrical power, because really most devices like DC better than AC. Now, this is done with the power cord on laptops, tablets, and smartphones. They don't have this giant box that you see in the upper corner here. Instead, they have some kind of converter in the cable that'll convert that power over. Now, large power supplies are needed for computers that require more energy. So, for example, computers with powerful graphics cards draw a lot more power and usually require something more than a 500-watt PSU. Now, again, because this is a lot of circuitry, a lot of energy conversion stuff, there's typically a fan in order to help vent heat generated away from the temperature-sensitive computer. So, if you look here, we have on this particular model, there's a fan on top here that would be in charge of blowing that air around. Next up is storage. And we have an example of a storage module right here. That is a traditional hard drive. This is used as a storage medium, which contains things like your operating system, your files, and any other data that may exist. Now, a traditional hard drive is a metal disk that is coated with a magnetic material for storing data. So this right here, this circular thing that's in this corner, that's what's known as the platter, that right there is what your data gets written to. Now, the other kind of storage medium we'll talk about is the solid-state drive, which uses electrical signal to store data rather than using a physical disk. Now, one of the advantages of a solid-state drive is that because there's no spinning disk or magnet heads that have to read or write the data, the solid-state drive is more durable and also has quicker access times. Now, what this also means is that data is not stored from the front to the back of the machine, whether you're looking at traditional or solid-state, but is random access. So that means if you have this hard drive here and you put a piece of information on that, let's say, takes up this, and they have another piece that takes up this around there, but then you delete that first one, well, what the computer is going to do is it's going to try to fill in that first gap first before it goes and fills on the successive gap. Now, this means that data can be retrieved in any order, not sequentially, which is kind of a good thing because you don't have to worry about random odd spaces not being filled up. It tries to compact it down. However, this can lead to something known as disk rot, as a program can be located really kind of anywhere throughout the hard drive, which also in turn increases your retrieval times. Next up is optical drives. Optical drives are used as a form of allowing the computer to read extra data from external sources. So CD-ROM, DVD-ROM, DVR-W, and even Blu-ray combo drives. Now, ROM stands for read-only memory. This means that the data once written can only be accessed, cannot be changed. Now, one thing about optical drives, because remember, these are falling under optional media. Many of the forms of disk media that are being used are being replaced by things like flash memory, such as USB, streaming, or even cloud storage due to the fact that you can have much greater storage and faster transfer speeds. Like the transfer speed from a DVD to your computer is slow compared to that of even just using a regular USB stick. Now, internal cards. These are often added to increase the performance of or to give the computer access to something that's not included with the motherboard. So, for example, video cards are typically added to increase visual performances. They're used largely in gaming or visual rendering for things such as CAD or Autodesk. Now, sound cards are often added to give an increased sound performance. Now, one thing to note, sound and video cards are often integrated into the motherboard, but are usually not designed for high-performance tasks. Sound is a little bit easier to get away for most people, like at least 90% of the people out there using a computer. The onboard audio will suffice for what they're doing. Now, if you start getting into some crazy audio creation stuff, or you're manipulating sounds, yeah, you could maybe benefit from a sound card, but you don't need a sound card. Now, network cards are the last type here that we're going to talk about, which are added to give your computer access to either a wired or wireless network. So this is how, let's say you have a desktop. Most desktops have on their motherboard a built-in Ethernet connection. However, let's say you want to make your desktop wireless because you don't want to run a 100-foot Ethernet cable from your bedroom to your parents' router. So what you do is you install a wireless network card, and now because they have, let's say, wireless at your house, you can just connect to that wireless network. Or here's another true story. If you have a wired connection, and let's say an electrical storm comes through, and it doesn't fry your motherboard, but it fries the NIC connection where your Ethernet cable would plug in, you could get another wired network card, plug that in, and you'd be good to go. All right, folks, that concludes our notes. Until next time.